Hello everybody, my name is Yannick, formerly known as Golden10, and today I am very happy to welcome you to this very special video. I think in every second video I talk about coming up with a very special video, but today it is really special, at least also to me. You know, these days I try to keep away officially from the Bond thing because, well, first of all, I'm not the biggest fan of the state that Bond is in nowadays, but still I have to give all the credits to the makers of the Bond films, because they have given me my all-time favorite movie. And I'm not just talking about Bond movies, I'm talking about movies in general, GoldenEye. And since this year also marks its anniversary, I thought, well, let's do a video on all the sounds of GoldenEye. I'm not talking about sound effects, I mean there were plenty of famous ones in the movie as well, but I'm talking about the score sounds, the sounds that you could hear in Eric Serra's fantastic soundtrack. And you know, I hope I don't break any illusions or anything like that, because a lot you can track down from sampling CDs, from racks from the 90s and so on. And it's been almost my lifelong mission to track down these sounds, find what these sounds are made of, how they're made, where they can be found. And you know, I started out with this journey when the internet was not that big, so you couldn't do a lot of research really. And it's been in the last couple of years that more and more information surfaced, and that's when I picked more and more things, and I was able to kind of perfect that sound that I'm after, which is the 90s Eric Serra sound that has heavily influenced me, and I have to give all the credits and all the props to that man. He's a fantastic, outstanding composer, came up with some of my favorite soundtracks like Leon, The Fifth Element, and of course the GoldenEye soundtrack. And also a big shout out to Crawleywood, who made those amazing Far Cry 5 GoldenEye inspired maps, and also Grassley, who also always surfaces these videos and does these amazing videos and long plays and so on. And through a recent video, again, the soundtrack has gotten a lot of attention. The soundtrack was the one I did back for GoldenEye 25, which was season assisted. And yeah, I got a lot of questions again. And they're always the same question. Not that I mock that, but I just thought, well, let's do the ultimate video with the sounds that were used in GoldenEye. I have prepared, well, probably the most famous sound that can be heard in the soundtrack, and I'm going to show you today. So when I'm going to search for those GoldenEye sounds, let's start with an actual rack, or let's say the most famous sound from GoldenEye, which is sometimes referred to as the dong sound, the gong sound, the sonar sound, the pong sound, whatever. I mean, I've read at least 10 or 20 different variations on the name. But I mean, it's clear, it was never disclosed what the actual name is, and today I can reveal the mystery. It is called Ice Missile. And when you're talking about GoldenEye sounds from the soundtrack, there's one ultimate machine that was really defining of that soundtrack, and is a 90s rack that I've got sitting here in my rack collection, which is called the EMU Cussion. And that said sonar sound, let's just settle for that, because pong sound or dong sound sounds really weird and could have a weird connotation. And this is called Ice Missile, and I'm going to show you how the patch looks. And then we're going to try it out a little bit. So sometimes I read online, because one time I remember Grant Kirkhope, the composer of the actual Nintendo 64 game soundtrack, once revealed that the sonar sound is from the EMU Pro Toys, which is also available as a digital version. Usually back in the 90s it was an actual rack, and he referred to the Infinity One sound. And let's have a listen to that. It sounds kind of similar, it's kind of there, but the audiophiles among you, they can sort of tell that the version in the movie sounds much more hi-fi and sounds much more well-rounded and defined and so on. And that's because the EMU Pro Toys Infinity One was used in the game score, but not in the movie score. In the movie score, it was actually, like I said, the EMU Percussion Ice Missile. Now, you may ask yourself, how did I find out? Like I said, the journey to finding this sound was really, really painstaking, and I mean, I'm not going to need that now. But sometimes I even went as far as really tracking down French keyboard magazines from the 90s that featured Eric Serra. You know, they were magazines from the mid-90s, bought them off Amazon or eBay or what have you. And you can see there were interviews with Eric Serra around that time, so 93, 94, 95, 97. And back in those days when they did these interviews and these features on these artists, usually they also had a list of instruments and stuff they had in the studio back then. So I could actually see what gear he used. I read about the percussion, I read about the EMU Morphoise, which was also used in the GoldenEye soundtrack, I suppose, for more of the pad sounds, the atmospheric sounds, and so on. So that was a massive help, of course. And then once I discovered this ice missile sound, I was convinced, yes, that's it. How did he use it in the movie? Pretty straightforward, just without much processing, maybe cutting off the low ends a little bit, but that's pretty much it. Now, the percussion does not only feature that ice missile sound, the famous GoldenEye or the mid-90s Eric Serra sound, but it features a whole nother slew of sounds that you could hear in the movie. Let's check out a couple of them. A sound that you could hear all over the GoldenEye soundtrack as well was the reverse cymbal, and there are kind of two versions of it in there. There's the reverse cymbal just one time, you know, and then there is one version that you could actually hear at the end of the car chase with Xenia, when the Aston Martin comes around the bend and then stops, and you could hear that kind of double reverse cymbal. And then there was a track on the soundtrack which, depending on the version you have, is either called Pleasant Surprise for You or Xenia, and that's the place in the movie where Xenia actually, or where the helicopter takes off. Bond has to run onto the frigate, the helicopter takes off, Xenia kills the two pilots, and then in the track there's that sound, and I always ask myself, is that a snare sound? Did Eric Serra create it, or whatever is that? And it's actually called Big Pipe, again from the percussion tool. Let's have a listen to that. And now let's quickly run through a couple of other sounds that you can hear all over the GoldenEye soundtrack that are also from the percussion rack. One I dubbed Face Kick, you can hear it here. And in the original soundtrack, it's in this track. Then again, jumping back to the track A Pleasant Surprise for You, or Xenia, is something that I dubbed Razor Buildup. You can hear it here in comparison to the soundtrack. And then, for instance, in the beginning, when Bond jumps down the dam and then sneaks, you know, on top of the toilets, takes off the ventilation shaft cover, and you can see Bond's face appearing in the movie from the shadow. There are kind of a bunch of distorted deep sounds, and I think I found a very similar one on the percussion, if it's not the sound. And actually, here's another sound of the GoldenEye Overture that you can probably recognize. So that's basically a splash hit. So those are a couple examples of what you can find in a percussion tool. And there are a couple of more, but they're more like in the background, and I don't want this video to be too long, so let's move on to the next thing. Something that I assembled myself about 10-15 years ago is a combination of various sampled trombone, deep bone sounds, and a very deep drum sound. And let's have a listen to that. And that's kind of my emulation of that famous soundtrack piece that you can hear here in comparison. And then a question I also got a lot are these fanfare and stabs, and it was da-da, 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 da-da. So it was about, that's a long time ago, 15, I think even 20 years ago, where I read somewhere online on a forum Again, back in those days, that was very rarely the case. But I read somewhere, and I actually could then prove it, that what Eric Serra had done, for instance, for the famous GoldenEye gun barrel, so those GoldenEye stabs that are in the gun barrel music as well as afterwards in the GoldenEye Overture, before it really cranks up, is actually the track Bond Back in Action, the beginning of that track, heavily processed. And so I thought, if I want to do that myself, I'm not going to use the original recording of Bond Back in Action just to, for safety measures, whatever that's worth. And I recreated that, an orchestral mock-up of that, and then did kind of the same processing that Eric Serra, I think, had done, just telling by ear, so adding phasers, adding a bit of bit crusher, and stuff like that, and I wound up with this. And then I made a video a long time ago kind of recreating that antenna sound, I call it. You can hear it in the later parts of the movie. Again, listen to the sound in isolation compared to the actual place it was used in the soundtrack. And I even make a little making of back then, so it's a couple of sounds together. I remember it's a harp gliss, it's an orchestral hit reversed, so that was famous in the 90s as well, and a swelling cymbal sound, all reversed, compressed together, and then used, and also a couple of different sounds added to that, and that's what I wound up with. Then, of course, again, very famous for the GoldenEye soundtrack, the Timpani sound. And I mean, it's still something that blows my mind, that you could actually pull off the Bond theme, the dum-da-da-dum-dum with a timpani. I mean, already to have that idea is so ballsy and so resourceful. I just really, hats off to Eric Serra for that. And then something that is quite in the background and that's not often referred to when you talk about the soundtrack is that one drone that you could hear in the transition between the quiet, the sneaky quiet thing of the GoldenEye Overture and then when it ramps up. And it can also be heard on another track, Boris and the Lethal Pen, at the beginning. It's kind of a drone that morphs, and I can still not really track down what it originally was. And I always think that, having read a couple of interviews with Eric Serra on making GoldenEye, when he was kind of in his heydays back in that day when he made GoldenEye, and, you read different versions. In some versions he said he couldn't wait to do it and he was absolutely blown, and in some other instances you read that he had to be convinced to do it because he was kind of in the middle of his, like I said, of his high phase with all the Luc Besson productions and so on. So I don't really know what is true, but I would say that according to himself, he did not indulge himself making the GoldenEye soundtrack, spending weeks tweaking sounds and so on. The selection and the whole thing that he put together is absolutely amazing and brilliant, if you ask me. But still, I think he would have resorted to some pre-made sounds for the drones and so on. But here's kind of my recreation. Those are a couple of different drones that I put together from various sample CDs from the 90s. I have a lot of them laying around and that I bought and just collected over the years. And that's what I wound up with. Again, in comparison to the soundtrack. And then something that I'm still amazed to this day that it doesn't get more recognition, it doesn't get mentioned more, is again a sound that was famous in GoldenEye, but Serra also used it in Leon and after GoldenEye in The Fifth Element, is that Rummm sound. I refer to it as the Rummm sound. And it's a sound that almost kind of sounds like a short sample of a choir doing Rummm. And I think that's just one of the, again, defining sounds of the GoldenEye score. And actually, again, you often find the answers in decrypting Eric Serra's sounds by just pitching it up, because he did a lot of sounds pitching everything down and processing it. And when you take these sounds and then pitch it up again, then you usually find out what it is about. Like we heard at the beginning, the dong or the sonar sound actually in the end is a heavily processed tambourine sound pitched way down. And that Rummm sound actually is one of those, again, famous 90s things or orchestral hits that I found again on a sample CD and then pitched down again, did some processing, added reverb and all these things, and that's what I wound up with, again, in comparison to the movie score. Another thing is in that track where you can see in the train where you have this kind of tension building up, and it's in the train sequence as well as in our Cymbal when Boris does his flicking with the pen, and then there's this track that's very lo-fi and very deep and brooding, but you have this kind of whistle on top of that, and that's a sound that always haunted me and fascinated me as well. And again, that was when I couldn't really absolutely for sure track down, but I found something that is similar in Omnisphere, and that is called Rise of the Shadow People. Have a listen to that in comparison to the original score. And then there are a couple of things that are notable from the GoldenEye score that I'm not going to present you because they're kind of your standard 90s things that they just used. So it was like Triangle were heavily featured in the GoldenEye soundtrack, and the sleigh bells, of course. So I read somewhere in a YouTube comment that Eric Serra is the one who made the sleigh bells great. So yeah, I think so too. And then of course we're going to kind of close this chapter with the more instrumental sounds and the more tonal sounds with this little thing. Of course, again, featured in the GoldenEye Overture. And back in my GoldenEye source days, I also once made a making-of video of that instrument and how it is used in the context, and I'm going to show it to you now. Then, of course, let's also check out that bass, which I sometimes referred to as the porn bass. I don't know why that is, but it kind of gives this, you know, the GoldenEye matches da 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 da. It can also be heard in the track Boris and the Little Pen, and that's also a sound that I absolutely love. I think in the original, Eric Serra, being a bass player, did that actually with his actual bass, because I tried to do it with different sounds on the wave station, you know, like organ sounds and so on, to get this graspy sound. But also always the attack was wrong. If it had too steep of an attack, it sounded too aggressive, and if it had too little of an attack, it sounded too rounded. So I couldn't quite nail down that sound, and I think it's just down to the fact that it was actually performed with a real bass, doing some processing with it. In my case, I added some bit crusher, I added a bit of phasing, and of course an amplifier that kind of distorts the sound, and when you play two notes simultaneously, it really gives that grungy, kind of really nasty, but still at the same time rounded and tame kind of flavor, as it were. And I did a combination of two sounds, an actual electric bass sound, just a plain electric bass sound with no processing, and this sound from the Wave Station, which was an organ sound, again heavily processed, playing two notes, so harmonies on top of each other, which gives it that nice grungy sound, and that's how it sounds like in the end. Okay, and now another fun part, and now we're going to talk about percussion, because I think the GoldenEye Overture drum loop is one of the things that I just have in my head still to this day. And I always ask myself, what did he do these sounds all himself? Is this a composition? Did he do the processing, everything? And I was really shocked when it was brought to my attention that there was a sample CD back in the 90s which was called LoopZilla. And I just one day found that on eBay, bought it, had it shipped to me, and then I did, hours and hours of listening to these tracks, because you always have these tracks that are split in two. So you have one kind of musical track, and then there are two full music tracks on it. And there's the full music track. I mean, that's how the sampling CDs back in the 90s were done. You have the full track, and then you have all the individual elements. So like the percussion, the rhythm, the harmonies, the instruments, and so on. You have all that in succession. And then I did just hours and hours of browsing through it, and all of a sudden I found this thing, which was just called Hip Hop 94 beats per minute. And I have to give a warning first. This might destroy the GoldenEye Overture for you forever. Have a listen to it. I mean, that's just insane, isn't it? You can already hear the GoldenEye drum loop, and it was taken from there. In isolation, it then sounds like this. So of course I sampled that and I use it in my game that I'm working on right now all of the time, or sometimes when it fits, because it's just such an iconic drum loop. I just really love it. And the CD is just full with this stuff. And another track that I found on that very same sample CD, again can be heard in the track A Pleasant Surprise for You, or Xenia, however it is called. And it is called Unknown Track 28. That's what it's called after importing it. Have a listen to it. That's absolutely, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? I mean, you can see with these two drum samples, that's basically your GoldenEye sound right there. So I hope you found this interesting, and again, thank you very much for attending this premiere. Thank you very much for being on this channel, and I hope you keep following my work that I do for my own game, which is called Dangerous Connections. Again, this is going to be very much inspired by GoldenEye as well, in terms of tone, world building, and the score, of course, as well. Thank you very much for being here. Have a good time, and see you next time.